Picture the coldest night you've ever experienced. Now stretch that night into 20,000 years. No heated homes, no insulated jackets, no weather forecast warning you what was coming. Just open land, falling temperatures, and a version of your own species standing in the middle of it with nothing you'd recognize as technology today. And somehow they didn't just survive, they thrived long enough that you exist because of it. That fact should feel almost impossible. Modern humans regularly struggle in freezing weather, even with heated cars and down jackets. So, how did people with none of that make it through repeated ice ages that reshaped the entire planet? The honest answer starts by correcting an assumption buried in the question itself. Ice Age humans weren't without technology, they simply had a different kind, one so effective that traces of it still influence how humans survive cold today. Archaeologist Olga Soffer spent years studying one of the most overlooked survival tools from this period, twisted plant fiber cordage, essentially early rope and thread, found pressed into fired clay fragments at Ice Age sites in what is now the Czech Republic. Her analysis revealed something remarkable. These impressions showed evidence of woven and knotted textiles, meaning Ice Age humans weren't just wearing rough animal hides thrown over their shoulders, they were producing fitted, woven clothing, and likely nets and slings as well. Technology invisible in the fossil record until someone thought to examine the accidental impressions it left behind in fired clay. That detail matters enormously. Fitted clothing traps body heat far more effectively than draped hides. Some researchers studying Ice Age adaptation have argued that this leap from wearing skins to sewing and weaving actual garments may have been one of the most important survival technologies humans ever developed, arguably as significant to survival as fire itself. Fire, of course, was the other major piece. Archaeological evidence of controlled hearths appears at Ice Age sites across Europe and Asia, often positioned deep inside caves or rock shelters specifically chosen to block wind and retain heat. Researchers studying these sites have found that hearth placement wasn't random. Early humans consistently chose locations that functioned almost like early insulation systems, using the landscape itself, rock walls, narrow cave mouths, natural windbreaks, to multiply the effectiveness of a fire that would otherwise have been far less useful against genuinely brutal cold. But surviving the Ice Age wasn't only a story about materials and heat sources, it was, just as much, a story about numbers. Anthropologist Anna Belfer-Cohen and other researchers studying Ice Age social structures have pointed to something crucial. Small, isolated groups facing repeated environmental extremes had far lower survival odds than groups embedded in wider social networks. Evidence from Ice Age sites, shared raw materials found hundreds of kilometers from their origin, similar tool-making styles spread across vast distances, suggests these early human groups weren't isolated bands struggling alone. They were connected through trade, shared knowledge, and likely marriage networks that stretched across enormous territories. If one group's local food source collapsed during a particularly brutal stretch of winter, having relationships with distant groups meant somewhere to turn, information about where game had moved, sometimes actual physical relocation to more survivable territory. This is where the real technology of the Ice Age reveals itself. It wasn't only rope, fitted clothing, and carefully placed fires. It was cooperation itself, functioning as a kind of insurance system no single individual or isolated family could have replicated alone. There's a striking example of just how sophisticated this cooperation became. At sites like Sungir in Russia, archaeologists have found Ice Age burials containing thousands of painstakingly crafted ivory beads, sewn directly into elaborate clothing, an investment of labor that would have taken enormous time and skill to produce. Researchers studying these burials have argued that this level of effort suggests strong social hierarchies and deep community investment in specific individuals, evidence that these were not desperate, barely surviving bands, but organized, socially complex communities capable of supporting specialized skills, symbolic behavior, and long-term planning, even while enduring some of the harshest climate conditions in human history. Put all of this together, and a very different picture of Ice Age survival emerges than the one most people carry around. Not a story of isolated struggle against impossible odds through sheer physical toughness alone, but a story of extremely sophisticated adaptation, engineered clothing, strategically placed fire, long-distance social networks functioning as insurance against local disaster, and communities organized enough to support elaborate craftsmanship even under extreme pressure. None of this required anything resembling modern technology. It required something else, arguably harder to build: coordination stretched across vast distances and long stretches of time, refined generation after generation until an entire species had assembled everything it needed to outlast an age defined by cold severe enough to reshape continents. Picture the coldest night you've ever experienced and stretch that night into 20,000 years. Your ancestors didn't survive that by accident, and they didn't survive it alone. They survived it by building an entire interconnected system of solutions so effective that pieces of it, sewn clothing, strategic shelter, and the simple, ancient habit of relying on people beyond your immediate circle, are still quietly keeping you alive today.